This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. I am Tim Flanagan here with Amanda Kramer, and this is a milestone in the Winning Through Culture podcast series.
Absolutely is.
It is our first time on video. This is 100 plus episodes in the making. When we started Winning Through Culture, back in 2020, we had a couple of ideas on what it might evolve to, and it's come way beyond that. And today is really the first opportunity we finally had to get to a format we wanted to get to, which was get to video and take our game to another level. So welcome back. And for those of you that are new to the podcast, seeing this on video for the first time, I'm sure you'll give us a little grace as we venture in to video after 4 years of being audio only. So welcome, Amanda.
Excellent. So it is fun to be here. And grace, I have to lean into that. That is a word we continue to go back to, but this is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm excited about it. So for today's episode, there is an article that I read in one of the professional journals for financial services, oh my goodness, 10 years ago. And it has just carried with me throughout my professional career. And we were having a conversation about accountability the other day, and it kind of popped into my brain. So for this episode, we're going to dissect this fable around accountability. And we're also going to lean into truly where the signs are that a culture is either progressing or where a culture potentially might be taking a step backward or might start to break down a little bit. And over the course of Winning Through Culture, we've talked significantly about the fact that we use our daily lives to discuss really what these concepts look like and feel like. So today is going to be a lot about experiences, our own personal, and then organizations and brands that we have been invested in patronizing. So looking forward to kind of hopping right in. So where we'll start is we do have a statistic, which I think is important to share around employee retention, which ultimately impacts how you would support your customer relationship. So whether you're a big business, a small business, this episode is for you. So research by Deloitte shows that organizations with a strong culture have 40% higher employee retention rates and 30% higher levels of innovation compared to organizations that do not have a strong culture, or as referenced here, a weak culture. So as we kind of hop into this discussion, I think the first point we should look into is, why do cultures ultimately break down? So I know you have some examples and some thoughts around that. So we want to kick us off and...
Yeah, I think the first thing, Amanda, to really touch on, though, is when you think about that statistic, why is that a big deal? Well, turnover is a really challenging thing in any business environment. As any business owner knows, any executive knows, turnover is a real challenge because it takes an awful lot of money to replace someone, to replace the talent, to replace the institutional knowledge. So having a really healthy, engaged culture is critical to retention to reduce turnover. The other item that I think is critically important when it comes to that same statistic is that if you have a strategy in your business that you want to execute on, and you are constantly shifting people in and out of that because you can't retain people, well, that's a real problem. You're not going to execute much, and you're probably going to end up changing your strategy all the time because you got a new set of people. I'd say the third thing that is really relevant to that statistic is the reality that as you are moving down the path of building a culture in a business, there's all kinds of statistics that say, that an organization where people actually enjoy going and enjoy working with one another is a place that helps people stay. And in doing that, again, it provides a continuity that a lot of businesses, if they don't have, are going to have a really difficult time achieving whatever their objective is. And I'd say the fourth thing is, the reality is the labor participation rate in America continues to go down.
It does, yes.
There are fewer people in the workforce, and the competition, if you will, for talent has gotten obviously more expensive. But there just are fewer high-quality people. So I think this topic we're going to tackle today is really, really important because if as a business you are not able to retain good people and key people, you're going to have a real challenge, and that's going to affect the other people that are in the organization when they see that happen. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage that the importance of this topic cannot be underestimated.
Well, and I have a very unique position in our daily life where I've actually been exploring, as we've talked about on the podcast before, but culture conversations. But at the end of the day, they're really retention conversations, if you think about it.
Yeah.
All of the trends and the themes that I'm hearing on a consistent basis lead back to that. And that is both in our client relationship, because at the end of the day, who we work with on a daily basis, they are our clients, but we also have the employee population that we really have to be attuned to, because you and I can say certain things, we can act a certain way, which are in alignment with our core values. But if not everybody who's a part of the organization is in that same alignment, then the client relationship could potentially pick up on that or could suffer in some way, shape, or form. So having that transparent feedback loop is really, really important. And ultimately, if the employee retention is high, so the staff that you physically employ ultimately will lead to that ability to have high client retention too, or a repeat customer, however your business is structured.
Yeah, and I think ultimately you know why people stay.
I do. I'm literally asking that question right now. I'm like, so why do you keep working with us? Why are you
and I know you don't ask it in a way that makes it sound like they should leave.
Right.
But you know why people stay, but you also know where you can improve. So I think that we've done a previous episode on that type of engagement with your employees to really take that deep dive, those conversations you have, which you call culture conversations.
Right.
I am curious, are we going to talk about the fable before we get into the fable?
I think we should talk about some of the signs as to where a culture might be taking a step back. And then let's read the fable, because I am going to read it from the journal.
You got to read it. Yeah.
Because I want to make sure I do it justice, right? And then we can talk about the implications from an accountability standpoint.
Okay.
So let's start at what are some of the signs as a business owner, a leader, an entrepreneur that you should be attuned to when you are working on building your culture and progressing it forward that might indicate a shift in the opposite direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we live in a world of volatility, uncertainty, change. And I think that specific to your question, when you look at what goes on these days in a business environment, there's a few things that I think you got to pay attention to. If you have, as an example, a culture that's very collaborative, and then all of a sudden that starts to shut down, should be a warning sign.
Oh, yeah.
If you have a healthy culture of communication and transparency, and all of a sudden that starts to shut down, that's a signal that you better pay attention. It doesn't mean that your business is coming off the rails. It just means that you need to pay attention to what's going on. I think the overarching theme, and this makes a big presumption, the presumption is that your organization has stated core values.
Yes.
I think every organization has core values.
They do.
I think some state the core values and repeat them. This is who we are, this is what we stand for. And then I think some organizations have unstated core values, which is, ultimately the core values in a culture is witnessed by the way people behave in a setting, in a business setting. And those unstated core values can be just as strong in a culture. And I think the key thing is a business that has stated core values. Are you seeing those core values play out in people's daily interactions in the way they show up? And everybody goes through seasons, everybody goes through challenges, so this isn't about, it's perfection all the time. It's just a function of, if you've got stated core values, what are you seeing relative to how aligned people are? And again, this is a challenge in today's environment. There's businesses that are merging and acquiring companies and letting people go, and so you have a constantly unstable environment.
It's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, those stated core values I think are really important. I would say conversely, though, I think we can think of a lot of examples of businesses that don't have stated core values, but they definitely have core values. And those core values are, in essence, guiding people's behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's usually not in a good way, at least in my experience. And I know we're going to talk about, organizations that exemplify a culture of ownership and accountability and really
empowerment
and are admirable, that you want to emulate. And it's easy, quite frankly, which we agreed we won't spend a lot of time on, to focus on those businesses that have gone off the rails, do have unstated core values, that have led them to a very bad place.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's usually impacted lots of people and lots of clients or customers and lots of, shareholders if they're public companies. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and when you're thinking about those core values that might not have been stated, but they are guiding the experiences that both the internal customer, or employee, is having versus that external relationship, what's happening internally is seen and experienced externally, even if someone's not sharing that with you. So I find that the importance of having what I call culture conversations is really just that transparent feedback loop. So yes, oftentimes on this podcast, we talk about that internal dialogue that you're having. You need to ultimately be having that externally too, because there are two perspectives that are going on and they need to be in alignment. So we are going to talk a little bit about some of our personal experiences when we talk through that. But so we talked a little bit about just communication in general, like in making sure that the core values of an organization are stated, ultimately that they are experienced, and that there is an alignment there to every interaction or encounter that you're having between the people, right?
Yeah, reinforced through positive behavior.
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we also touched on a little bit that there's potentially a lack of accountability could be a warning sign that we might need to address if that's some of the
I think
feedback we're getting.
I think the point about accountability is every business needs to be profitable.
Absolutely.
Every business has goals to be successful. The question is, how do you get there? And I think that's the piece when you think about accountability. There is healthy accountability, which is people take ownership. They have clarity of their own personal values and how they're aligned to the business and how they need to show up in order to produce a successful outcome, win, get results, be profitable. That's I'll call that the healthy track. The unhealthy track is that business wants to win. It wants to be successful. That person wants to be successful.
As a leader.
In their career, as a leader, as an executive. But because the unstated values say winning at all costs is all that really matters, that's where you start to see what the real core values are. And the core values could be, we'll take a shortcut. We won't be transparent. We won't tell the truth.
Yeah.
We'll do whatever it takes to get where we're trying to go, no matter what the effect to the people involved. That can be insidiously hidden in a culture. But I say from an accountability of culture perspective, there's a lack of accountability in that culture because no one's accounting for what I'll call the bad behavior.
Yeah, or what leads to a toxic work environment.
Or it's in fact basically rewarded.
Yeah, that is also true. You do have to look at your recognition and reward system.
But it could be rewarded by people getting away with that, people getting ahead with that. And that's the piece that when I think about accountability in a culture, there's a healthy ownership, I want to do this, I got this, and I can think of people in our own organization that really exemplify that. And then again, we will not go down the rabbit trail of all the businesses that I think we talked about offline that exemplify that lack of accountability in a culture because it's anything goes to win.
Yeah, and I like that you say that anything goes to win. It's that you're not giving equal consideration to that internal and external impact.
Well, right? There's multiple stakeholders.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what else do you feel might fall in the category of signs to look out for? I know one for me, and I'll hop in, and is that you spoke about it a little bit, but when you're most engaged and vocal employees or stakeholders, however you use that term, start to get quiet when previously they were not, that is something that I'm really attuned to. So it is a indication for me that we need to have a conversation, even if we've had one recently. Like, I need to go back to that person and say, can you share with me what's going on? Tell me about your experience with the organization right now, because it could look different at points in time. And it could be that we just had a dialogue a month ago, 3 months ago. Things can change very quickly.
Yeah, and no person or organization is perfect. So there may very well have been an incident or something that created the pause button to get hit.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that when you what you're touching on is twofold, and I know you're very good at this in your work, is being attuned. So being connected, being aware. We talk a lot about self-awareness. We've done podcasts on self-awareness, leadership awareness. That awareness, but then you're stepping into that uncomfortable place to find out what's going on. I think, too often, again, in an unhealthy culture, there's nobody wants that. They may recognize what you just said as far as somebody shutting down, but they're like, push that person aside. They're trouble brewing. Let's leave them alone. Well, that's not going to get to a great outcome. And more importantly, no one has the courage to step into the conversation and say, hey, what's going on right now? Because that conversation may lead to an uncomfortable moment or an uncomfortable situation where it's like, oh, we have to address this. Or I'll use me, I as a leader have made a mistake, or I have done something that needs to be addressed. So that's where I think that willingness, when people do get quiet, to step into it is so critically important.
And I've been in a lot of it's real, and I've been in a lot of uncomfortable conversations because I've asked the question, and you do have to be vulnerable enough to do that. And so my thought around when somebody who has previously been really engaged, very vocal, first person to raise their hand for a new initiative or a project or what have you, and then all of a sudden you can see them start to retreat, it's time to go and get uncomfortable and really ask what that scenario is, or maybe that one situation, that one thing that happened, that one comment that you thought nothing about as the leader that might have shared it or said it, that person is now still sitting with. And it could have happened 6 months ago. It could be something that happened years ago that is just now being reopened, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
or it could be something going on in their personal life.
It absolutely could be, because we do look at the person as a complete person. Like what's going on with them at their home life is
shows up at work.
It absolutely shows up at work. I know a lot of people are like, no, it's very cut and dry. No, it is not. They are a full
the
person.
Fallacy of that the whole person comes to work, not a part of them.
That's so very true.
Yeah. The signs we're hitting on are engagement, communication, effort. Are people putting in a full effort? Those are the key things. I mean, there's obviously some super obvious outliers, like somebody just gets up and quits and nobody saw it coming. But I think the key things from an awareness perspective and really paying attention as a leader, having a pulse on the organization are the ones that we just touched on, which is, again, communication, engagement, and ultimately, the conversations that take place, not just sharing information, but conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we should dig deeper into the accountability.
I want to hear this.
The Fable?
The Fable. I mean, I've heard the Fable.
Yeah.
But to your point, this comes from an financial services industry journal that's goes back 10 years. I don't even think they publish this journal anymore. I used to love reading it.
No, I don't believe they do. And if you can tell, this has been bent for quite a long time. You've
kept it and referred to it often.
I have. And it's funny, I was talking to an associate of ours that I shared this with, I don't know, 6-7 years ago now, and we were just having this conversation the other day. He was like, I know, I took a picture of the actual Fable. So I am going to read it so I do it justice. But this is from Gamma International, and it was the February 2014 edition.
Wow.
So just proving that it is solidly over 10 years old. So this is called Accountability's Able Fable. There once were 4 people named Everybody, Somebody, Anybody, and Nobody. An important job had to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that, And because it was everybody's job, everybody thought anybody could do it and that somebody would ultimately do it. But nobody realized that everybody thought somebody would do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done.
So if that doesn't make your head hurt.
I know. That's why I said I have to read it. I have to read it.
I'm glad you didn't memorize that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe I'll work on memorizing this.
No. That's
but it's something that has sat with me because oftentimes in culture, people assume that that's somebody's job, which, yes.
It always is somebody's job. There's always somebody.
Exactly. But it's everybody's responsibility.
And there's always everybody.
And anybody could do it, right? So you talked about environments that are either, I'm going to say positive or lean more on the other side to potentially becoming toxic, that it is in every single person, every single part of your human capital in an organization is responsible for ensuring that your culture can progress.
Yeah. And
right?
What jumps out at me, though, with this little fable is you got to have clarity.
Oh, you do.
You got to have clarity in what it is we actually are speaking of, what it is we are trying to accomplish.
Yes.
What is anybody's role, what is everybody's role, what is somebody's role, and what clearly is nobody's role.
Right.
And that's, I think, where most businesses and cultures get in trouble is they haven't defined any of that.
Yeah, was a lack of clarity around vision.
So now anybody is somebody, is nobody, is everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just, again, it's something that has sat with me for, more than 10 years at this point. And every time we're walking into a new initiative or, there's the opportunity for some type of integration, whatever it might be, this sits with me. Well, I'm like, okay, we have to have clarity. And we use an operating system, and we've done lots of podcasts around it to make sure that this fable does not come to life.
Well, I think
right?
EOS
absolutely.
As a system really helps clarify accountabilities.
It does.
So from a cultural perspective, everybody knows who somebody is and everybody understands their role. I mean, that obviously sometimes gets murky. I mean, we were dealing with that in the business yesterday. I was like, let's go back.
It's a constant conversation.
This person's been here a year. I feel like we may have gotten off track. So let's have that conversation. And what I thought was going to be a 10-minute conversation turned into a 55-minute, which was what we needed to do.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of clarity that came out of that conversation. And the accountability, which is me looking and saying, well, this person, we hired is a talented person, but it doesn't seem we're getting the results. Well, there was a gap of communication and clarity with that person. So we recalibrated and now have to sit down and say, hey, this is what we said we were going to do. This is where we have found ourselves. And now we got to get back on track. And I think that's the key thing that jumps out at me when I hear this fable again, is the clarity is either there or it's not. And when it's not, that's the first sign of this story becoming a reality.
Yeah.
There are other elements.
Oh, absolutely.
But that's definitely the first one.
Well, and we mentioned a little bit earlier around there is an ownership. So in any scenario, in any initiative, project that comes up, any work product, there has to be a very clear owner of said work.
Yep.
So if there is not a system in place in the organization to clearly identify who that owner is, and the owner doesn't mean that that person is responsible for doing every single task or milestone that's associated with getting it to done or to getting it to a reasonable result.
Yep.
It means that that person is speaking for and is ultimately responsible for it's on track, it's off track, or at the end of the day, it's done or not done. Right. Yeah. And so that person can help guide. And that is where that core value dialogue we were having earlier really comes into play. So as an organization, if you have core values that are, around transparency, around accountability, around growth, whatever it might be, you really have to attune that to the ability of the person. So making sure that they have the tools and resources to get it done so it doesn't fall into this case of, well, I thought somebody else was going to do that part. Well, if you don't clearly have that conversation, you can't have that expectation of somebody.
That's always my fascination is the belief in business that people are telepathic.
Oh gosh.
So,
Well, you just referenced the conversation you had yesterday, right?
yeah.
Like we thought we communicated it really clearly.
Uh-huh.
Clearly there was work that was happening, and we got to
And then we didn't have some communication over a period of time.
Correct. So it's that revisiting. So having some type of structural system in your business to make sure that you can constantly revisit and recalibrate is really important to make sure that this doesn't become a reality for you.
Yeah, and I think the other element there that is important to note is it is very easy in a fast-paced world to say, well, of course they know what to do, so somebody is going to do it. Mm-hmm. And that lack of, coming back and checking in and creating a new agreement, as I like to say from my good friend Harvey Smith over the years. You can always, have a clear agreement. You can always renegotiate it, but have a clear agreement. And that's the piece that, again, in a culture that falls apart from an accountability perspective, gets off track, there tends to either not be any agreements made, they're not communicated clearly, and then there's not a renegotiation. I mean, again, I can think of a situation recently where I made an agreement with somebody, didn't happen. I went back, said, hey, we had an agreement. Oh, I forgot. I'm like, all right, how are we going to not forget again? Mm-hmm. And how are we going to get back to our agreement? And, we're all human. We get moving fast. We, forget things. So I think that's the key element here is if you want to have that healthy culture, you've got to constantly be in dialogue, not making assumptions that this person or that person's going to do it. Or, of course, because that's the other side of this I see is it is clearly somebody's responsibility, and that somebody is choosing not to do it.
Correct.
For whatever reason. They don't know how, they don't have the resources, they don't want to do it, they don't agree with the path, and there's no communication, and that's how your fable comes to life.
Oh, so
and eventually nobody is everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So.
And then you end up in a stall pattern, or you end up in a place that leads you on that end of the scale that we don't want to go to, where it becomes somewhere that people don't want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Right? Like when I ask the question, why do you continue to partner with us? The answers I get are very different, right? When we're at that stage versus before.
Well, and and I think that's where you also start to see the shortcuts and the expeditious behavior. And it's like, wow, I'm fond of the hard way is the easy way is the hard way. Mm-hmm. And the easy way is to be expeditious, take a shortcut, get somebody to do something that may or may not be appropriate, that eventually is going to become hard if, things unfold the way because of the lack of accountability, the shortcut taking nature. The hard way is, this is a really big problem. It's going to be really challenging to solve. And we're going to have to really roll up our sleeves and get into this and get uncomfortable. And again, that's a healthy accountability culture in my mind.
Yes.
Versus that unhealthy culture where it's like, you know what? Let's take a couple shortcuts here. Let's get this done. Let's get that done. Let's not tell anybody. And boom. Let's hope nobody finds out. Well, back to your fable.
Yeah, exactly. Hope nobody finds out.
Whoever nobody is.
This is very true.
But there's always somebody.
Yes. Well, and you can avoid the blame game that ends up happening because you are having you're creating that environment where the connectivity and that communication is just expected and that you are encouraging learning moments. So I often find in the feedback that I get is that, okay, cool, well, I unfortunately made a mistake or whatever term the person uses. I like to look at it as a learning moment. We're all human. You just said that again, right? We're all human. We have good days and bad days. We have moments where we're really stepping into our leadership abilities, no matter if we're technically a leader in the organization or not. I see everybody as a leader, but not every organization does. So the ability for us to give grace, we talked about that at the beginning of the episode, giving us grace with this, a new format. We have to give grace in those moments. So it's not so stringent that you don't have any room for a little gray. I like, there's always some gray between black and white. But at the end of it, you have had and created whether it's quarterly, whether it's monthly, whatever works for the size organization that you have, where there should really be no surprises. If you were constantly coming back and revisiting that conversation, that you shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, that's how that person feels right now. Like those signs we discussed, we should be able to have them pretty immediately and be able to address them so it doesn't become a larger issue where the frustration comes out and somebody starts to blame somebody else and people are unable to take accountability for what has been identified for their role.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think on the other side of it, let's talk about some experiences that we've had with either brands or organizations or our daily life where the core values have truly been stated, revisited, experienced, and lived that have really shown that progression towards evolving an organization.
Accountability ultimately leads to experiences, or a lack of accountability leads to experiences.
There's both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my dear friend, Mr. Steve D'Annunzio, has a great saying, leaving others valuable experiences, which is love.
Right.
In his coaching, he's very focused on making sure that the person he's coaching is, how are you leaving others with valuable experiences? So you and I chatted in preparation of this for some of the organizations that we've encountered through our daily life that have created great experiences. We're going to touch on two of them right out of the gates.
Yep.
But we're going to share our experiences kind of to illustrate from a cultural perspective some of the things you can do to really create an ownership accountability culture.
Yeah, and I was sharing with you the experience. So we currently have a class of interns that are actually going to graduate very soon with us. And I was working through the EOS model with them. And part of that, right, is that we're crafting that structure both at a business level, but also providing them with an opportunity to do that for their personal lives. Because they're at different phases of their collegiate career. They're either stepping into that next year in college or they're stepping out into the workforce. And so it's really important to come back to that. And so when we were talking about core values, because that's part of it, is to actually write down and articulate in the shortest number of words possible what your core values are, that you can say it looks like this and it does not look like this. And so one of the examples as we were discussing it was brought up of Chick-fil-A. And everybody has their opinion on whether you like their chicken or you don't like their chicken. You stand behind them as an organization or you don't. And that is fine. Everybody has a right to that. But specific to using them as the example here is that I personally have had nothing but a consistent experience from a customer service standpoint in going to a Chick-fil-A. Whether I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, or I am in some other state, some other city, it does not matter. I know that if I pull up to the drive-thru or I do a mobile order, whatever that is, I know that I am going to be greeted kindly. I know that they're going to do what is right to make sure that my order is correct. And I know that I'm going to get a consistent exit experience. It is always my pleasure. Yes. I've never not heard my pleasure. And I am one of, I don't even know how many customers they have, but
they got a lot.
They got a lot. So think about the drive-through. I know
go to the drive-through at lunch.
Exactly.
They're 2 lanes. They're wrapped around the building.
Well, and the one that's closest to us, they literally made a drive-through only because they originally had seating, and they needed all of the parking lot to be able to shift people through, so they didn't have the traffic issue. And there's still a traffic issue. It's insane to go there at normal eating times, but the point is that in the intern conversation, it came up that one of their core values, and I might not say it exactly the way that they would, but it's that the customer comes first. So I was just reflecting on that because that is a very important element that we experience as going and being customers of theirs. And I know that about them. Yeah. I expect that from them. But that is something that is rewarded inside of Chick-fil-A internally. And so the intern that I was speaking to had actually worked at a Chick-fil-A and talked about their training program. And it is embedded in what they hear from day one. So there's no opportunity for that not to exist. Yeah. And it is stood behind. So they're rewarded for it. And conversely, if it doesn't happen, there is a conversation about it, right?
Yep. So I think what you hit on there, Amanda, is obviously the consistency of the experience. Well, what does that start with? Well, it starts with how they train.
Exactly.
And where does that go first? Well, who do they hire? So I've never worked at a Chick-fil-A, but I have certainly frequented a lot of Chick-fil-A's. I am a fan of number one with a large fry and a large unsweetened iced tea. And I try and
I love that.
limit my indulgences to Chick-fil-A. But they definitely look for a certain type of person.
Absolutely.
They train people in a way that, and I think the point you said about the customer comes first isn't the same as the customer's always right.
There is a big distinction there.
Because,
yes.
That gets into a whole other host of issues in today's society. But the customer's first means, hey, that's why we're here. We're here to serve this community, because really it's beyond about serving great, meals.
Yeah.
It's about serving the community through their charitable endeavors.
Absolutely.
And through the
Stewardship
donations.
is a large part.
Big stewardship part of the organization. Again, core value of the
absolutely.
organization. And the kindness that you said is that consistency. And obviously, they've turned it into an efficiency machine between the technology and the credit card and boom, go. How they keep track of all that.
Innovation at work there.
Yeah, that's definitely innovation at work. So I think that, using them as an example, which I think most people, at least in our part of the world, in the Southeast, have experienced, and maybe in most parts of the United States now have experienced. There's others. In-N-Out Burger's another one on the West Coast that's pretty famous for the same thing. And,
agreed.
That it's the consistency of experience, which starts with who do they hire and how do they train those people, and then how do they reinforce and coach the behavior. And to your point, in 20 years, I've had one kind of wonky Chick-fil-A experience. All the others have been consistently, pleasant young people. Never had a situation literally in 20 years where the order was wrong, or I did think once my French fries were regular, not large, but it probably was good for my health anyways. But at the end of the day, that is, let's be honest, people aren't going there for the health benefits of what they're eating.
Correct.
They're going there for the experience, which gets back to what we're talking about specific to culture, and how do you create a great culture is to create a great experience for the people you serve.
Absolutely.
And, we're not going to go down the trail of bad experiences. I mean, anybody that's flown in the last couple of years has got stories. I know I've got them by the dozen these days. My joke is you don't want to travel with me, because if you do, you're going to get delayed. It's like no matter where I'm going or when I'm going, it's a rare moment anymore that I have a smooth flight. So,
yeah.
And I've just become accustomed to it. It's not a great experience. I mean, I've got a trip coming up next week that I was going to fly to. I already bought a ticket, and I decided I'm driving because my last experience, I can't afford the
for
delays.
That to happen again.
Yeah, my window of time for this trip and the importance of the trip's too narrow. But that is the other side, is an experience, and in some cases, weather is not in anybody's control. It's not in the airline's control.
Right.
But there are other things, maintenance. My most recent flight was a maintenance issue, and then that flight, got canceled, and then the next one got delayed for whatever reason. And
the domino effect at that point.
I got home safely, so I was happy.
Right.
I just missed a few meetings.
You bring that up, and it's all you now have lowered your expectations. My
expectations are
like almost at
getting to the point of maybe I should just drive.
Yeah, so like they're at the floor.
I have two trips coming up. One of which, as I said, I already bought an airplane ticket for. The other one, I was getting ready to buy a ticket, and they're 6-hour drive, and with traffic, 4.5, 5-hour drive. And as much as I really don't look forward to a long drive like that, I think I know I'm already driving on one of them, and the other one I'm probably going to end up driving. And that's because the consistency of the experience I've had has not been good.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I just can't afford the aggravation. And, as much as it can be aggravating to drive 6 hours, not great for your body, that's what I'm going to do. So I think overall, in a unhealthy, lack of accountability culture, the experience is either inconsistent or it's consistently not good.
Yes. Well, and to your point
the opposite of Chick-fil-A.
Absolutely. Well, and to your point about your one experience that wasn't what you had expected of Chick-fil-A, that has not lowered.
No.
If you go through another, you're not going to go to Chick-fil-A. You're not going to pick somewhere else to eat because you had one out of however many over 20 years. But from flying, you have gone all the way down on the expectation scale, right?
Yeah.
So that just shows you that, and I would bet, again, I do not know the Chick-fil-A that you went to, but I would bet that if you shared that with the leadership or the owner of that or operator of that Chick-fil-A, that would be immediately rectified.
Probably.
Whereas the airline, and I get that they're large corporations and all the things, but the airline, that's not necessarily what's going to happen.
No.
In the immediacy.
Having done it, I'm going to get a canned response.
Yeah.
That either is from an AI chatbot or a cut and paste that is making it very clear there'll be no further discussion about this matter.
Right.
And so that is, that is what it is.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want to get to a place in your business where that is what it is.
I think that's the point relative to this podcast episode around accountability and culture is, you definitely, as an owner of a company or an executive of a team, you don't want to get to a place where people just say this is terrible and this is the way it is, and and that's what I call toxic culture. It's one that people are either going to disengage from or flee, and it's going to have, I've seen businesses with phenomenal strategies and pretty solid leadership teams, and yet it only takes one or two people to kind of create that tone that can kill a lot of momentum and kill a lot of enthusiasm and engagement, and that's reality. And as a business leader, as a business owner, back to some of the things we talked about, you've got to be very attentive to what's going on, and you got to be willing and courageous enough to address the things that are getting in the way of a healthy culture of accountability.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, and another example that we were talking about, and everyone I think at this point, right, has stayed in a hotel. It doesn't matter really what brand, but one experience I know that you've personally had, and I learned about this recently, was, and this goes back to that ownership and that empowerment of those that are part of your team, is that at Ritz-Carlton, if there is an incident that, let's just say, negatively impacts a individual who is staying, they have employed a certain dollar amount per person per incident that every single associate at that Ritz-Carlton can go ahead and take action through without having to get that next level of approval. And so, and the dollar amount is, let's just say it's approximately about $2,000 per person per incident that person that is working at the Ritz-Carlton can draw on to make sure that they are able to rectify for that person staying. I know you've personally experienced it, so maybe share a little about what that's like, right? I being the receiving party of that.
If you think about, not everybody maybe has been fortunate to stay at a Ritz-Carlton. They're not the least expensive hotel.
Point taken, yes.
But there's a reason for that, and the mantra of the entire basis of the Ritz-Carlton was started by one individual in Atlanta with a vision of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And so it was about the experience. And my own personal experience, I've stayed at several Ritzes, and at the end of the day, all hotels are a place to sleep and get ready for the next day and whatever important event you have or whatever celebration you're having. And in this particular instance, this was years ago, I was at a black tie event, staying overnight at a Ritz-Carlton, and it was a relatively new Ritz-Carlton. And I had a tuxedo on that I owned. So, nice black formal wear. And I was walking past a table. It was like a wrought iron table. And the edge of my leg caught on the tiniest corner of that table. I mean, it's shocking how this turned out. And it literally cut the fabric.
Like with precision,
probably. Probably better than you could have with a razor blade.
Oh, wow.
And it was kind of funny because the way it cut across and then down as I turned. And fortunately, I had a liner in my tuxedo, but now I had this big flap of fabric and a white patch right above my knee. And I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty embarrassing.
And noticeable.
And noticeable. And what am I going to do? And I got the attention of one of the folks that was working at the Ritz-Carlton. This was like a cocktail reception before a black tie dinner. And they immediately came and apologized. And they said, "Come with us, sir." They took me in the back. And this was a manager now. And he proceeded to find out who working there wore my size pants. Now, you may say, well, that's freaky. You're putting on somebody else's pants. I got to be honest with you. I didn't think about that at the time.
Yeah.
So
I don't know that. Yeah.
I want to acknowledge that, yeah, that's kind of weird because they all had black pants on. They
Right.
were not obviously formal wear. So I get a pair of pants for me to go to this event.
Right.
Because we're not wearing the torn up pants that I had, which, by the way, could not be repaired. I was like, well, it's so precision. Maybe they can. And the tailor I took them to just laughed at me. She's like, no.
No.
But,
A little heartbreaking.
But what happened was they actually, and I don't know how they did this, they got me a pair of pants, not somebody that worked theirs, and came and got me later in the event, gave me those pants. So now I had my own pair of pants that, black tie type. Again, it was dark, so you couldn't tell. And I talked to the manager at the end of the event. I go back. There's already a note in my room apologizing, letting phone number, get in touch with me, and I'll send you money. Tell me what we owe you. I didn't have the receipt for this thing. It was relatively recent purchase for the event, but this was 20 plus years ago. It was, $500, $600 tux. It wasn't, $5,000 tuxedo.
Right.
And, I just told the guy, I said, I don't know, I think it was this. I got home from that event and there was already a check in the mailbox for $1,000 and another apology note. So, I think about that experience back to what we were talking about, leaving others valuable experiences.
Absolutely.
I mean, they obviously probably needed to, sand down the edges of this new table they had since it was razor blade sharp. But the way that was handled, from the minute I brought it to their attention all the way through, it was very calmly. It was, professional. And here I am talking about it over 20 years later. And so I think that's the piece that, again, that experience, that positive experience that is put together drives a culture of accountability. Because back to your point, if people don't realize what you said is every person that works at the Ritz-Carlton is empowered to solve whatever problem they encounter for their guests.
Absolutely.
So it's not like, well, I'm in housekeeping and I, make minimum wage, and so I got to go talk to my supervisor and they got to go talk to theirs. It's like, no, you are empowered. If there's something that you believe you can do to make that guest experience better or improve upon it because maybe something didn't go well, you're empowered to do it.
Yeah.
And that's a culture of ownership. When I say a healthy accountability culture, it's ownership. Because now you are empowering everybody in the organization, irrespective of their role, irrespective of how much money they make, irrespective of their educational background, their life background. You're giving everybody an equal footing to say, you are an owner in this experience, and you are empowered to do what needs to be done to make it better.
And even just to further that point, the amount of effective communication that needed to happen with the parties that were involved in that one scenario with you is almost mind-blowing. Like, from a standpoint that the manager took you back there to find somebody that had the right pant size, and then somebody, and it might have been him, I don't know, but then somebody went and purchased you pants and brought them back, and you had a note in your room, and there was already a check in your mailbox when you got back. Like, the connectivity of all the parties at play there just speaks to the fact that they're all in alignment with that core value.
Yep.
There was no, there was
no deviation.
No deviation.
Back to somebody, everybody, anybody, or nobody. Put that experience through that lens, and I would have been walking around with a pair of pants with a flap down.
True.
And I would have thrown them out and had to go buy my own new suit. Or tuxedo. And
I know how kind of a person you are. You probably were like, wow, this situation happened. You were like, well, that was on me. I mean, I'm the one who, skirted the table or what have you. So you weren't expecting them to be like, let me address this fully for you, which is just,
No, No, I mean, I had no idea how they would respond. It
See?
was early enough in my traveling life that I had, gosh, this was probably 25 years ago, that I had, been at a couple of Ritzes, but not many. And it was certainly a nice experience otherwise. But yeah, that's, again, back to leaving others valuable experiences. And I'll stay away from my airline stories, I promise. But
I think everybody probably has an airline story. I feel like you can go to the negative side
that's what
fairly
I'm saying.
quickly.
We all have those stories too.
Right.
So
it's what you choose to focus on.
Correct. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think as we break down this topic of ownership and accountability in cultures, there's a really clarity around what is a healthy ownership culture, which is, hire the right people, you train them properly, equip them to do their job, give them the resources they need to do that job, have absolute, constantly reinforced clarity over what it is that is the objective of that business, and looking at it again through the lens of an experience.
Right.
I was again asked recently in our business about situation, and it was interesting as I'm saying that is I explained it not through metrics, not through, tracking. That's all important, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
I described it through the experience I wanted the advisor to have. And it was like, oh. And I was like, I get the metrics, but that's not telling me anything about the experience they're having. And so an ownership culture is focused on that experience. It's focused on communication, collaboration. It's focused on core values. It's focused on living those core values, not just giving them lip service. And it's focused on winning. That's one thing.
Well, it is winning through culture.
It is
right?
winning through culture. Yeah. So I want to, make sure it's winning, but it's not winning at whatever cost or winning at whatever expeditious shortcut manner can be taken.
Yeah.
And it's harder. It's back to my hard easy. The hard way becomes the easy way becomes the hard way. And I just implore everybody listening to this podcast, business owner, executive, individual, take the hard route, create a culture of ownership and accountability, know that it's going to get off the rails, have the courage to jump back in and get it back on the rails. And, as we always say in this podcast, culture is a living, breathing, everyday thing that needs attention. It's not a write it on a piece of paper, put it in a cabinet and forget about it. It's something that needs to be, just like a human being or a plant or any living organism, it needs to be nurtured and attended to every day.
Well, and everybody has a responsibility to make sure that culture can exist in the way that you want it to as an organization. So I do encourage those that are listening along with us to take a clarity break, as we like to say, and really reflect on what are some of the warning signs that you're seeing in your organization that you are attuned to. Maybe drop them in the comments. We'll be sure to include Accountability's Fable for you to reference back to. But we appreciate you being with us on another episode of Winning Through Culture.
And our first
full video
episode. So
Yay!
Thank you everybody for being with us today, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful,
because your culture matters.